The great dome of the Ethon High Synod was not designed for silence, yet silence was the only thing that filled it. A heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against the crystalline spires and the bioluminescent robes of the galaxy's oldest legislators. The air within the chamber was usually alive with the harmonic resonance of debate, the thrumming of graviton lifts, and the polite chittering of 1,000 distinct species bargaining for trade rights or border adjustments. But today the air was stagnant, tasting of ozone and terror. Above the central dais, a massive holographic projection dominated the cavernous space, displaying the terrified, fractured telemetry of the northern expanse, where the stars themselves seemed to be going out one by one. The crimson stain of the Vraxian armada was spreading like a necrotic infection across the star chart, a relentless tide of biomechanical warships that did not negotiate, did not pause, and did not show mercy. High Counselor Valoris, a towering figure whose carapace shone with the iridescent sheen of the purely diplomatic caste, gripped the edges of his podium until the chiton cracked with a sharp, sickening sound that echoed through the stillness. He looked out at the assembled representatives of the Galactic Concordat, seeing the same reflection of doom in every pair of eyes, whether they were faceted, slit-pupiled, or cybernetic sensors. The Vrax had broken the Krell line. They had shattered the blockade at the Ocular Nebula. There was nothing left between the ravaging swarm and the core worlds but empty vacuum and the prayers of civilizations that had forgotten how to fight a war of survival. "The reports are confirmed," Valoris said, his voice amplified by the acoustic architecture but sounding undeniably small against the magnitude of the disaster. "The Third Fleet is gone. We have lost contact with the sector governors of the Hydes cluster. The Vrax are accelerating. Their trajectory puts them in orbit of this station within 3 standard rotations." A murmur of panic rippled through the hall, a dissonant wave of sound that threatened to turn into a scream. Valoris raised a hand demanding order, though he felt he had no right to it. "We have exhausted our options. The mercenaries have fled. The ancestral weapon platforms are drained. The ancient treaties with the energy beings of the void have yielded no response. We stand alone at the precipice of extinction." "Not alone," a voice rumbled from the lower tiers, a deep, grinding sound like tectonic plates shifting. It was General Krog of the Doran hegemony, a massive, rock-skinned warrior whose people had been the muscle of the Concordat for 3,000 years. Krog stepped onto his gravity disk and floated upward, his singular eye burning with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "There is one file left on the table, Counselor, one species we have deliberately ignored, the Terrans." The suggestion landed like a physical blow. A hiss of derision erupted from the delegation of the Solari, ethereal beings of light and gas who viewed solid matter as a crude inconvenience. "The Terrans?" the Solari ambassador scoffed, their form flickering with indignation. "You speak of the mud-dwellers, the scavengers. They are a species barely out of their industrial infancy. They weld steel plates together and burn liquid fuel. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is laughable. They are reckless, unstable, and primitive. Asking them for aid against the Vrax is like asking a microbe to fight a supernova." "They survived the scouring of their own system," Krog countered, his voice low and dangerous. "They survived the Silicon Wars. They survived the isolation we imposed upon them. You call them primitive because they do not use elegant energy weaves or sing to their crystals, but I have seen their border patrols. They are resilient, and they are the only ones who have not fled." Valoris looked at the holographic map, watching the red stain pulse closer. He remembered the humans. The Concordat had voted to quarantine them 2 centuries ago, citing their aggressive expansionism and their refusal to abandon dangerous technologies that the rest of the galaxy had deemed unethical. Specifically, their obsession with kinetic weaponry and subspace tunneling, methods considered too chaotic for civilized space. They were seen as the unruly children of the galaxy, kept in a playpen in the Orion Arm, ignored and mocked. To call upon them now was an admission of total failure. It was the act of a drowning empire clutching at a blade of grass. "We sent the distress beacon," Valoris admitted quietly, silencing the room. 3 cycles ago, when the outer perimeter fell, I authorized the transmission of the omnisignal to Terra." The Solari ambassador flared bright white in shock. "You invited the barbarians into the core. You have doomed us to chaos before the Vrax even arrive. They will not come with aid. They will come to loot." "The ruins." "Did they respond?" Krog asked, ignoring the outburst. "No," Valoris said, his shoulders slumping. "There has been no handshake, no acknowledgement, no subspace return. The sensors show nothing leaving the Terran quarantine zone. No fleets, no armadas, just Silence. They have likely decided that our destruction is none of their concern, or perhaps they are already dead, consumed by some folly of their own making. The despair in the room thickened, transforming from acute panic into a heavy, mournful acceptance. If even the savages would not fight, there was truly no hope. The counselors began to look at their datapads, perhaps composing final messages to their broodmates and families, preparing for the end. The holographic map continued its grim update, the red vectors of the Vraxian fleet piercing the final defensive shell of the system. The sensors began to scream a new warning, a high-pitched wail indicating the detection of high-energy signatures entering the system's edge. "They are here," a technician shouted from the sensor pit, their voice cracking. "Vraxian Vanguard exiting hyperspace, count is infinite. Sensors cannot track individual signatures. It is a wall of ships. They are charging main disruptors." The view screen shifted to the tactical feed. It was a nightmare made manifest. Thousands of jagged black warships, pulsing with sickly green energy, tore through the fabric of space. They did not move with the grace of Concordat vessels. They moved with the jerky, unnatural spasms of reanimated corpses. The void between them crackled with arcing lightning. They were not here to conquer. They were here to unmake. The Concordat defense grid, a pitiful arrangement of golden satellites and drone swarms, opened fire, but their beams were absorbed effortlessly by the Vraxian shields. The Vrax returned fire, and the silence of space was metaphorically shattered as the defense grid evaporated, turned to dust in milliseconds. "Shields at maximum," Valorous roared, though he knew it was futile. "Evacuate the council, get the archives to the escape pods." "Wait," the sensor technician called out again, confusion overriding their fear. "Reading a new contact. Anomaly detected. Vector. Impossible. It's not coming from hyperspace. It's not coming from real space." "What are you babbling about?" Krog barked, leaning over the railing. "Is it reinforcements?" It's a gravity well," the technician stammered, their fingers flying across the interface. "A localized singularity opening directly in the path of the Vraxian Vanguard, but the mass reading is fluctuating. It's massive, it's tiny, it shouldn't be there." On the main screen, between the terrified station and the oncoming wall of death, the stars began to bend. Space didn't tear open as it did for hyperspace travel. Instead, it seemed to bruise. A region of darkness, darker than the void, began to expand, swirling like oil in water. It distorted the light of the Vraxian ships, stretching them into grotesque shapes. The Vraxian fleet paused, their collective hive mind seemingly hesitating for a microsecond at the unknown phenomenon. Then the ship emerged. It did not glide out of the portal. It erupted from the bruised reality like a leviathan breaching the surface of a dark ocean. It was ugly. That was the first thought that crossed Valoris's mind. It was hideous. It lacked the smooth curves of the Solari, the geometric perfection of the Doran, or the organic flow of the Vrax. It was a brutalist slab of matte black metal, scarred and pitted, shaped like a spearhead wrapped in industrial scaffolding. There were no glowing engine ports, no elegant solar sails. It was a block of hostility, bristling with kinetic batteries, railgun spines, and missile pods that looked like malignant growths. It was colossal, easily 3 times the size of the council station, yet it gave off almost no energy signature. It sat there, a ghost on the sensors, a phantom in the visual feed. "Identity," Valorous whispered. "Transponder is archaic," the technician said. "It's broadcasting a text-only string, old binary format, decoding. It says UNS Phantom Strike, class interdictor, status decommissioned, redacted, intent denial." "Humans," Krog grunted, a strange smile touching his rocky lips. "That is a human warship, but I have never seen a design like that. It looks dead." The Vraxian fleet, recovering from their momentary confusion, unleashed a hellstorm. Thousands of green disruptor beams converged on the solitary human vessel. The light was blinding, washing out the sensors, turning the viewscreen into a wall of emerald fire. The council looked away, expecting to see the debris field when the filters adjusted. No single ship, no matter how armored, could withstand the focused fire of a Vraxian vanguard. But when the light faded, the ship remained. It hadn't raised a shield. It hadn't maneuvered. Instead, the space around it seemed to shimmer with a heat haze. The Vraxian beams had simply stopped. They hadn't hit the hull. They had dissipated inches from the metal skin, their energy drained into nowhere. "Null field," the Solari ambassador gasped, their arrogance replaced by scientific horror. They are using a weaponized entropy sink. That is forbidden physics. You cannot just delete energy from the universe. The human ship finally moved. It didn't accelerate, it lurched, a sudden shift in position that defied inertia, placing itself deeper into the Vraxian formation. Along its flank, massive ports slammed open. There was no whine of charging lasers. There was only the silent puff of venting gas, and then the kinetic ordnance was released. It wasn't a laser show. It was a massacre of physics. The Phantom Strike fired solid slugs, projectiles the size of shuttlecraft, accelerated to a significant percentage of light speed. In an age of energy shields and frequency modulation, the Vrax had forgotten the terror of sheer mass. The slugs punched through the Vraxian shields as if they were mist. They impacted the hulls of the bioships, and the kinetic transfer was catastrophic. Ships didn't just explode. They shattered, their internal structures liquefied by the shockwaves. By the void, Valorous breathed. They are using railguns against a Type 3 civilization. But it wasn't just railguns. The Phantom Strike began to emit a noise that was picked up by the station's hull sensors, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated the very bones of the counselors. The ghost warship began to strobe, flickering in and out of visual existence. Every time it flickered, it reappeared in a different orientation, firing a new salvo. It was fighting in 4 dimensions, skipping through time by milliseconds to dodge incoming fire and reappearing to deliver a killing blow. They are micro-jumping, Krog analyzed, his warrior's mind racing to keep up. Inside a gravity well, that's suicidal. One miscalculation and they atomize themselves. Who is piloting that thing? A machine. Incoming transmission, the technician announced. Wideband, audio only, it's originating from the human vessel. Put it through, Valorous ordered. The static hissed, clearing into a voice that was surprisingly calm. It was not the roar of a barbarian, nor the mechanical drone of a computer. It was a tired, gravelly voice, human and heavy with age. This is Captain Halloway of the UNS Phantom Strike, the voice said. We apologize for the delay. Traffic was heavy in the quarantine zone. We advised the council station to reorient your shields to harmonic frequency Gamma 9. We're about to vent the flux capacitors, and it's going to get a little bright out here. Stand by. Before Valorous could ask what a flux capacitor was, the human ship did something that defied all logic. It spun on its axis, and the industrial scaffolding on its hull ignited. It wasn't scaffolding, it was a lattice of containment rods. The ship released a pulse of pure white energy, not a laser, but a radial wave of Cherenkov radiation. It swept over the Vraxian fleet. The biomechanical ships didn't explode. They simply ceased to function. Their lights died. Their engines went cold. The organic components within them seized and died instantly. In 10 seconds, the Vraxian vanguard, the terror of the galaxy, was reduced to a drifting graveyard of scrap metal. The Phantom Strike sat amidst the carnage, its hull smoking, venting coolant into the vacuum. The silence returned to the council chamber, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe and the uncomfortable realization that the universe was far stranger and far more dangerous than the Concordat had ever believed. The shuttle that brought the human delegation to the council station was as unpretentious as their warship. It was a box with engines, scarred by micrometeoroids, docking with a clunk that shook the delicate docking ring. Valorous, Krog, and the Solari ambassador waited in the airlock reception hall, surrounded by an honor guard of Doran shock troopers who looked nervously at their weapons, unsure if they would be effective against beings who could seemingly delete energy. The airlock cycled, steam hissed, the heavy ramp lowered. Valorous expected giants. He expected cybernetic monstrosities or power-armored titans. Instead, 4 figures walked down the ramp. They wore simple gray uniforms, devoid of the medals and sashes that adorned Concordat military leaders. They were small, soft-skinned, and lacked natural weapons. The leader, presumably Captain Halloway, was an older male with thinning white hair and a face lined with deep creases. He looked less like a warrior and more like a weary academic who had spent too many nights grading papers. "Permission to come aboard?" Halloway asked, his voice rasping slightly in the filtered air. "Granted," Valorous said, stepping forward and bowing his head lower than protocol dictate. You have saved us, Captain. The Concordat owes you a debt that cannot be measured. We did not expect you." Halloway rubbed the back of his neck, looking around the gleaming, crystalline hall with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "Yeah, well, we almost didn't come. The Senate back home was split, 50-50. Half said we should let you burn for locking us in the dark for 200 years. The other half, Well, we remembered that you have civilians here. Your ship, the Solari ambassador interrupted, unable to contain their curiosity. The readings were contradictory. It possesses mass, yet it defies inertia. It absorbs energy. It shouldn't exist. Under the laws of celestial mechanics, that vessel is an impossibility. Holloway smiled, a dry, humorless twitch of the lips. That's why we call it a ghost ship. It's not actually there. Not entirely. Look, can we talk somewhere with chairs? My knees aren't what they used to be, and I've been in an acceleration tank for 3 weeks. They led the humans to the High Council chamber. The walk was long, and Valorous observed the humans closely. They did not gawk at the splendors of the station. They walked with a purposeful, efficient gait, scanning the exits, checking the sightlines. They were predators, Valorous realized with a chill. Not the mindless hunger of the Vrax, but the calculated, intelligent predation of a species that had climbed the food chain by outthinking things stronger than themselves. Once seated in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the holographic gazes of thousands of delegates, Holloway took a sip of water provided by a drone. The Vrax aren't gone, Holloway said bluntly, skipping the diplomatic pleasantries. That was a scouting party, a big one, sure, but just the fingertips of the hand. The main body is about 4 light-years out, regrouping. They'll adapt to what we just did. They'll realize our kinetic rounds are solid matter, and they'll switch to point defense grav fields. Next time, the Phantom strike won't be enough. Then we are still doomed, a delegate from the aquatic rim worlds wailed. Not necessarily, Holloway said. He tapped a device on his wrist, and a projection appeared in the air, a schematic of the Phantom strike. You asked why this ship shouldn't exist. You're right. By your understanding of physics, it's an abomination. You built your civilization on the manipulation of light and gravity. Safe, clean, efficient. We went the other way. We looked at the spaces between the light. We studied the vacuum energy, the chaotic foam of reality. He gestured to the engine section of the holographic ship. This isn't an engine. It's a tear in the fabric. We don't move the ship. We move the universe around the ship. It's dangerous. It causes temporal bleeds, radiation spikes, and if we miscalculate by a decimal point, we don't just blow up. We erase the solar system we're standing in. That's why we were quarantined, isn't it? You detected our early experiments and got scared. We deemed you a threat to the stability of the sector, Valorous admitted, shame coloring his tone. We thought you were reckless children playing with fire. We are, Holloway said softly. But sometimes when the wolves are at the door, you need fire. You need a forest fire. What are you proposing? Krog asked. Alliance, Holloway said. A real one, not us as your servants and not you as our masters. We have the hammer, but we don't have the shield. Your defensive tech is light years ahead of ours. Our ships are glass cannons. We can hit hard, but if they touch us, we crumble. We need your shields, your sensors, your logistics. And in exchange, we give you the ghost tech. We give you the guns that can kill the Vrax. The chamber erupted in debate. To share their technology with the Terrans, to integrate their elegant systems with the brutal, reality-warping machinery of humanity, was heresy to many. But the image of the shattered Vraxian fleet was fresh in their minds. Silence, Valorous commanded, his voice booming. The Vrax will return in hours. We do not have time for philosophy. Captain Holloway, if we integrate our fleets, can we win? Holloway looked at his tactical officer, a young woman with eyes that seemed too old for her face. She nodded imperceptibly. We can't just win, Holloway said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. We can end them, but you need to understand something. The Vrax, they aren't just invaders. We've been studying them too. They're running. The room froze. Running? Valorous asked. From what? That's the part that scares us, Holloway said. And we're the ones who invented a ship that eats reality. The Vrax are fleeing a phenomenon in the galactic south, a consumption event. Stars are disappearing, not going nova, just vanishing. The Vrax are a migration fleet, consuming resources to keep moving. If we stop them, we have to deal with. What's chasing them? One war at a time, Captain, Krog said, clenching his fist. Let us kill the Vrax first. Agreed, Holloway said. He stood up. Get your engineers to the dry docks. We have work to do. The next 48 hours were a blur of impossible industry. The stark cultural differences between the Concordat and the Terrans became the catalyst for innovation. The Solari engineers, initially horrified by the human probability drives, found that their light-weaving techniques could stabilize the chaotic fluctuations of the human engines. The Doran armorsmiths discovered that human metallurgy, while crude, possessed a density that, when enhanced with gravity fields, became virtually indestructible. The Phantom Strike became the flagship of a hybrid fleet. Concordat cruisers were retrofitted with railgun batteries. Human destroyers were wrapped in Solari hard-light shields. It was a fleet that shouldn't exist, a chimera of high art and brutal industrialism. When the Vraks returned, they brought the true swarm. The sensors didn't even try to count them. The readout simply said total saturation. The sky above the council station turned black with the hulls of the enemy. "Fleet command to all units," Holloway's voice rang out across the comms, now linked to every ship in the Allied fleet. "Hold the line. Remember, they expect you to be static. They expect you to be polite. Don't be polite." The battle that followed was not a skirmish. It was a symphony of violence. The Vraxian swarm descended like locusts, but they met a wall of fire they could not comprehend. The hybrid ships moved with the jerk stutter of the Ghost drive, blinking in and out of reality, firing massive kinetic rounds that were accelerated by gravity magic. The Phantom Strike was at the center of the storm. Holloway stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the tactical plot. The ship was shaking violently, the hull groaning under the stress of maintaining the reality tier. "Captain," the tactical officer called out, "the Vraxian hive ship has entered the field, coordinates locked. It's the size of a moon." "I see it," Holloway said, "targeting. We can't penetrate its shields with standard rails. It has a singularity shield of its own, crude but effective." "Then we don't use standard rails," Holloway said. "Prepare the echo round." Valoris, observing from the comms, paled. "Captain, what is an echo round?" "Theoretical physics applied to ballistics," Holloway explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. "We don't fire a shell. We fire the potential of a shell. We fire the idea that the shell is already inside the enemy ship. It bypasses the shield because it doesn't travel through the intervening space." "That violates causality," the Solari ambassador screamed over the link. "Only locally," Holloway muttered. "Fire." The Phantom Strike shuddered with a sound that wasn't a sound. It was a psychic scream felt by every living being in the system. The main cannon didn't flash. There was no projectile. But 10,000 kilometers away, the massive Vraxian hive ship convulsed. A hole 5 kilometers wide simply appeared in its center. It was as if a eraser had been rubbed across the fabric of the universe. The hive ship collapsed in on itself, imploding into a sphere of superdense debris. With the death of the hive mind, the Vraxian swarm fell into chaos. The individual ships, lacking direction, became easy prey. The Allied fleet, emboldened by the impossible kill, surged forward, hunting down the remnants with a ferocity that surprised even Krog. It was over in an hour. The threat that had terrified the galaxy for a generation was reduced to drifting scrap. The celebrations on the council station were subdued. There was relief, yes, but there was also a new, pervasive fear. The delegates looked at the humans differently now. They saw the Phantom Strike docked at the primary ring, a dark stain against the starlight, and they realized that they had invited a monster into their home to kill a wolf. In the council chamber, Holloway stood before the High Synod again. The atmosphere was respectful but tense. "You have saved the Concordat," Valoris said, his voice echoing with formal gravity. "We are in your debt. The quarantine is lifted. The Terran Union is hereby invited to join the High Synod as a full member." Holloway didn't smile. He looked tired, impossibly tired. He tapped the console, bringing up the star chart again. He pointed to the galactic south, to the empty patch of blackness where stars used to be. "We appreciate the offer," Holloway said. "And we'll take it. We need the trade, we need the resources, but we can't stay here and celebrate." "The threat you mentioned," Valoris said, "the thing the Vraks were running from." "We call it the entropy tide," Holloway said. "It's not an enemy, it's not a fleet, it's a breakdown of physical laws. The universe is unraveling at the seams in that sector. It's spreading." "And you intend to fight entropy?" the Solari ambassador asked, incredulous. "That is a fundamental force of nature. It cannot be fought." "We don't intend to fight it," Holloway said. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the aliens who had called him a primitive, a barbarian, a savage. His eyes held a depth of sorrow and resolve that silenced them all. "The Phantom Strike. It wasn't built for war. You saw it destroy a fleet and you thought it was a weapon. It's not. It's a needle." "A needle?" "To stitch the wound," Holloway said. "Our understanding of the spaces between the ghost tech, it allows us to interact with the fabric of reality. We can repair the tier. We can stop the unraveling, but it requires us to go there." into the void, into the dark. "You will be destroyed," Krog said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Likely," Holloway agreed, "or we might become something else, something that shouldn't exist." He paused, looking at the assembled species, the fragile, beautiful, arrogant, fearful galaxy. "Humans, we're complicated," Holloway said, a faint smile finally touching his lips. "We build guns that break reality, and then we use them to try and fix the universe. We're calm because we know the score. We know that we're small, but being small doesn't mean you're helpless." He saluted, a crisp, sharp motion. "The Phantom Strike is leaving in 1 hour. We're heading south. If we succeed, you'll never see that dark patch grow. If we fail, well, it's been an honor." The humans turned and walked out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Valorous watched them go. He looked at the massive, ugly ship on the screen, the ghost warship that defied the laws of physics. He realized then that the humans were not the barbarians. They were the custodians. They were the ones willing to walk into the fire so that others could sit in the light. "Let the records show," Valorous said quietly to the scribe drone, "that today the galaxy was not saved by a warrior nor by a diplomat. It was saved by a ghost." Through the viewports, the Phantom Strike detached from the docking ring. It didn't engage thrusters. It didn't flare its engines. It simply shimmered, turning transparent, then translucent, fading into the background of the stars until it was indistinguishable from the void itself. It was gone, but on the sensors of the Council station, a single, steady ping remained. A heartbeat in the darkness. A promise that somewhere out in the cold, unfeeling night, humanity was holding the line. The Council chamber remained silent for a long time. Finally, General Krog broke the stillness. "We must rebuild," he rumbled, "and we must prepare. If they fail, the tide comes for us." "And if they succeed?" the Solari asked. Valorous looked at the empty space where the human ship had been. "If they succeed," he said, "then we must strive to be worthy of the ghosts that guard us." The work began immediately. But in the back of every mind, in the quiet moments between the reconstruction of the fleet and the drafting of new treaties, the image of the Phantom Strike lingered, a reminder that the universe was vast, terrifying, and wondrous, and that sometimes the things that shouldn't exist are the only things keeping us alive. The humans had revealed themselves not as conquerors, but as the ultimate paradox, a species of terrible power and profound sacrifice, walking the razor's edge of reality so that the rest of the galaxy could sleep soundly. Deep in the galactic south, where the stars were dying, a ripple passed through the fabric of space. A needle threaded through the dark, and the ghost warship began its work. The silence of the void was deep, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the furious, silent industry of the Phantom Strike, stitching the universe back together, one impossible moment at a time. The ghost warship that shouldn't exist now ruled not the battlefield, but the destiny of the cosmos itself. And in the council halls, they finally understood the human transmission that had been ignored for 200 years, the motto etched on the hull of the ship they had feared, ad astra per aspera, to the stars through difficulties. They just hadn't realized that the difficulties meant tearing apart reality to save it. The High Justicar Valen stood by the viewport, watching the space where the humans had vanished. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. "They are the monsters we need," he whispered to no one. "May the void have mercy on them, for they will have no mercy on the void." The stars twinkled on, indifferent but perhaps, just perhaps, a little brighter than before. End of record.